to tell them what's going on in the organisation, and the job of the meeting is to serve their purpose. But in actual fact, the job of a board meeting is to help the board guide the organisation to where it should arrive, essentially building the future for the stakeholders and the shareholders who have an interest in that future. So then if you use that as a broad framing, the agenda of every board meeting should be constructed with real purpose, getting real outcomes, even if it's just monitoring the health of the organisation. So then if you go down to the third layer, the CEO report becomes the ultimate supporting paper for the board meeting. So if there's a question asked, if there's a decision to be made as part of that agenda, the board will want to know, well, is the organisation tracking? Are there any issues? Is there any context, in the broader sense that might impact on their ability to make a specific decision? So kind of the CEO report, again, is their ultimate supporting paper. I'll hand over to you, Deborah. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the CEO report is, as Brett says, the kind of anchoring document in the board meeting, but it shouldn't be something that the CEO feels they have to walk the board through. This is really a paper about, we don't want to know what's going on in the minutiae of the day-to-day operations of this organization. I kind of always think I want to know what the board should be worried about. What does the board need to know to add value to this organization today? And so from that perspective, I kind of go back to what's the strategy of the organization, where are we going, what are our strategic goals, and what's in the board report that helps me understand how we're tracking on that.
Chris, you got a view on that, Chris?
Yeah, look, I think the board meeting is such a critical part of how a CEO operates. And I agree with Deb, you don't want to be spending time going into the minute detail. Quite often you want to assume a lot of it's read and use that time really effectively to get what the CEO needs from the board and vice versa. We'll unpack this a little bit later because I'm very familiar with the template, and part of that is to really get past the essential elements of how the business is performing and get into some good debate and use that time really effectively to get some decisions and other things done. So, but anyway, I know we're going to get into that, but yeah, I agree with everything Deb said.
Yeah, cool.
We have a question that's come up, Brett. To what extent should the CEO report split the operation update from the strategic? Do you have a recommendation about this?
Okay, I'd be interested in Chris and Deborah's view on this as well. But the way I approach the CEO report is, and you'll see again when we dive into the template, I'm usually referencing the big decisions or discussions that need to happen and are also in the agenda. But largely for me, the CEO report is kind of giving the operational context and background for the organisation, so the board members can breathe out and go, look, everything's on track, everything's okay. I can focus all my attention on the strategic matters, which typically for me, I'm doing separate papers. They're a separate part of the board pack. So I'm approaching, those more strategic decisions and topics elsewhere in the board pack. But I think as an underlying comment, the CEO report should always be leaning towards achieving those objectives, those big outcomes that define success.
Yeah.
Over to you again, Chris.
Yeah, look, I think, if the CEO report is effective, what it will do is highlight potentially areas operationally that need focus. And so what I've done in the past is, as you look through the CEO report, there may be something operational in the business that needs a little bit more attention, and you can cover that as a specific item, perhaps in the next board meeting, or indeed, delve into that at the time. But generally speaking, you want to keep it fairly high level and at a strategy layer. And the problem is, if you're getting bogged down too much in operational matters in a board meeting, you're actually not getting to the core of what the board and the CEO are trying to achieve, which is looking at the direction, ensuring strategy and other higher level items are given, adequate focus.
Yeah. I expect the board to have come to an agreement with management around what are the levers that move this business forward. And in each business, there are probably only 6 to 8 maybe metrics that will tell us whether things are going well or what needs attention. And so those may well be operational metrics, and I expect to see those in the board report, but I don't expect to send, this is a real example, I don't expect to see how many JIRA tickets there are and how many have been resolved. It's just too much information. I don't care.
We're leaning into the latter stage a little bit here, but you've triggered me beautifully, Deborah. So I kind of take the view, so you'll see in the template to cover, I probably have those 8 to 10 sort of traffic light metrics in the top of my CEO report. If they're all green, everything is sweet, I could just bathe in the praise of the board. If anything is orange or red, I'm going, shoot, are we off track with strategically, I need to get in front of the game and talk about that.
And this on the screen now is something I apparently said in my distant past, and I have to say I'm not quite as eloquent these days. But it really does reflect on the competence and ability of the CEO. Your job is to identify what the board needs to know and give them that information so that they can contribute to what you need from them at this meeting.
We have a raised hand from Alison Tui. Alison, is there something you would like to contribute?
I apologise. No, sorry.
No problem.
Finger trouble.
Please do raise your hands if you'd like to ask a specific question to the panel at any time.
Shall we move on to the next slide, Sean? We'll go into the second of the 3 big points. Righty, I'll kick us off on this. So how do you approach producing a CEO report? So again, I've got my 3 takeaways here. So number 1 is with agreed governance goals in mind. It's been really fascinating for me as the CEO, also learning his governance game as we've been running through quite a number of webinars now for 9 months or so. The really good contributors just constantly talk about that building the future. The organisation exists to create a future for the stakeholders and shareholders. So really, the CEO in a way is disarmed if they don't have a clear strategic mandate or vision or some form of clear understanding from the board. And in a lot of cases, the CEO will, in my view, need to be proactive and draft and create that if it doesn't exist, and then at the very least get it agreed with the board. Might pause before I go to the other points and just see if one of the guys has got a comment on that.
In an organisation, you've got to have goals. You have to be pointing at something. It's the old Alice in Wonderland quote. I think that's it. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I think I stole your quote, Brett.
You did. I'd forgotten about it, so I'll allow you, Deborah. I'll move on to the next bullet point. I might bring you in after one of these, Chris. So then moving on, how to approach that CEO report again, and this kind of borrows from what I was saying earlier. I always see that CEO report as setting the stage for the agreed agenda. So leading into every board meeting a week or 2 after the prior one, I'm on the phone to the chair, figuring out what I need to get board approval that will keep advancing the organisation. Because I've got authority within my delegated authority to do what I need to, but there's regularly coming bigger ticket items, approvals and things I need. So I use that board meeting ruthlessly to get what I need out of the board to move ahead. So the CEO report, very early in the piece, I'm cross-referencing my big decisions and agenda items. So as I write the whole CEO report, I'm kind of talking generally about the health of the business, and how we're tracking, but I'm also thinking about those agenda items and supporting those if need be. Chris?
Yeah, I think, and that's also about using the board effectively as a CEO, because we've all been in situations, and I take it from the poll that we've generally got a good, trusted relationship at board level from the responses. But this is the difference between a CEO that might come to a board meeting effectively in an ask covering exercise, where they're, they might be under a bit of pressure, but they're not actually using the board to make effective decisions. I mean, you've got to drive the agenda where you are using the board to actually as a sounding board, but also helping you to be able to steer the organization and get what you need from the board in terms of approvals, guidance, and that time's so precious. So you don't want to be there just talking through the mundane. You want to set the agenda that's going to help you in your role to move the organization to where it needs to go.
We have a question in from Letitia Mincham. Is there a webinar or resource you could recommend that is available to help us to determine those metrics? Coming from a newish charity, so room to establish things right, need to get to be able to establish things right. Any comments on that, Brett?
Yes, so we do have, there is the templates. We've got a CEO report template. So again, if you go to our blog, if you get time, Sean, perhaps you could drop it into the chat feature, just a link to that. So we've got a completely worked example as well as blank templates. So you can start there. And that's a fabulous idea. I think we could probably do some sort of deep dive, ask me anything session and work through some examples and take questions as we go.
Also,
go, Chris. Go.
Oh, I just, I've just joined a new board, and we're in the fortunate position where they haven't had a board. And so we are starting from scratch, but it's pretty clear the things we need to measure in this organisation, and there'll be discussions outside of the first board meeting to really settle on those key KPIs. And it's always a great position. If you're coming in as CEO, it's probably a case of sitting down with the chair and just working through those key metrics, understanding that, setting the template, and then, you'll probably evolve a little bit over the first, 3 or 4 months of that journey. But it should be reasonably clear, unless it's a brand new board, but I mean, any organisation or not-for-profit will have clear outcomes that they're looking to drive. And my advice would be probably not to overbake it, but just get those really key ones. And I think the template that Brett and BoardPro have created is a good starting point. And I'm using that on one or two of my other boards. We've tweaked it slightly, but the beauty of it, and again, I'm probably stealing your thunder a bit, Brett, but that visual representation right up front, which basically gives you that nice snapshot. Spending a little bit of time getting that piece right, I think, is really key.
I think there are metrics that are across a particular sector. So I'm thinking, for example, of the software as a service sector has a broadly agreed set of metrics that you would track, cost of customer acquisition, lifetime value, and things like that. In not-for-profit organizations, I imagine the metrics would be things like the size of your donor base, the recency, frequency, and value of donors would be something that I would be looking at, those sorts of things. But I suspect they are quite sector-specific, what the right things to measure are.
You've just reminded me, Deborah, we are looking at running a series of CEO report webinars and resources sector specific. So we've got someone specific out of Australia, Belinda, I think it was, more. We're looking to run exactly the session, but very focused on the association sector in which she's an expert. So I think if you just look out, follow our blog, sign up to get notifications and watch the space, I think is the short answer there. I might move on, and just so we can keep us on track here, and just talk about this final point of cultivating a narrative. So really, as I approach a CEO report, I don't have the narrative usually in my head when I start on day one. So I try and evolve that. The report for me takes about a week. So I start at the beginning of the week, I remind my team I need all the reports in. I send them the template to do their pieces. I try and work bottom up, so I'm considering the financials, individual reports from each of my line managers, and then often, teeing in with my co-founder or our CFO, just to say, well, where do we think we're at? What's the, because I only allow myself on my one-page CEO report, you'll see the template, you'll see very soon. It's only about 4, 5, 6 sentences. So I'm really trying to, present as well as I can, because for me, it sets the context for the whole meeting. So that's kind of what I mean by cultivating a narrative.
Brett, we have a couple of questions here we have time for. The first is, does governance differ between corporate and non-for-profit organisations?
So I have to admit we're possibly a little bit light on the panel today. I probably lean a bit more towards commercial today than not-for-profit. So feel free to ask that again.
Yeah, I've got some experience. I'll answer that offline.
Deborah.
No, I'll
Please
answer
do.
it offline. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
Okay, lovely. From Rob Slattery, do you agree with having a core or standard agenda for the structure with a clear set of clear items to be discussed in each meeting, but with the flexibility for them to be skipped by agreement?
Oh gosh, I'm going to lean on the other guys in a second, but for me, an agenda, I start fresh every time. We do have a couple of standing items. We always cover health and safety. There's 15-minute slot for Q&A on the CEO report, but the very beginning of my agenda, and you see in BoardPro, it's part of our standard best practice, always starts with key discussions and decisions. And typically sometimes they roll from meeting to meeting if there's carryover, but typically I'm constructing those, every month fit for purpose with the chair. Sounds like you've got a comment on that, Deborah.
Yeah, so I think having a structure is good because then you don't leave things out. I think having board alone time before the meeting for non-executive directors is an important part of the agenda. Some of the boards I'm on have a slot for blue sky thinking or industry intelligence type. What has everyone seen in the media or around the traps about this thing that we're doing? Any relevant environmental scanning, I suppose it's sometimes called, would be a standard agenda item. But as Brett said, putting early on the matters for decision is, in my view, the most important thing in an agenda.
Yeah,
Chris, do you want to comment on the action item? The last part of that question was about the development of action items and going through them. Do you want to comment on that from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I mean, just to add to the narrative so far, one of the things I would say about the agenda is you're going to have standing items. I mean, as a director, I want to know the health of the business. There's standard things we're always going to cover, and that's typically borne out in the CEO report. Again, there's going to be shifting agenda items depending on what the critical elements of the business. It does help up front, the beginning of the year or whenever it's appropriate, to actually put together an annual plan to make sure that there's things that don't slip through the cracks. So on another board I'm on, for example, we will spend one of those board meetings really, to Deb's point, really understanding the market and ensuring that we're on strategy. We might do one other or two during the year where we have a standing agenda item focused on risk and audit. And there might be one as well on people and REM. So these are quite common. And even if you're not a huge board, you want to be able to have some degree of annual plans so things don't slip through the crack. Look, on the action items, look, Brett, I mean, I think it's really important that that's well managed. How many times have you been to a board meeting and 1 or 2 days before, it's like, oh shoot, I've got an action item. I'll do a pitch here for BoardPro if people aren't using that.
I was just going to say, it's the thing I love most.
Yeah, I mean, I unashamedly will promote it because we're using it on a few of my boards. I'm on 4. I'm using it on most of those, and that is something that typically, unless you've got, whether it's BoardPro or whatever else, have a process by which action items don't slip through the cracks, because this is a process. It's a workflow that needs to be well managed, and it's harder when you're on a board because you're only coming together. You've got other distractions. If you're on a not-for-profit board, you've usually got a commercial entity that you're working in, and it's a very part-time thing, so it can actually get away from you. So certainly,
but you also have to be disciplined about how many action items you put in there. And as CEOs, you should be very well within your rights to say, okay, board, you've given me 12 action items from this meeting. Which ones do you actually want me to?
Yeah,
absolutely. We've got time at the end to tell a funny story about that from my last board meeting.
Well, let's move way back to you, Brett. So let's
go over to 3 because we should get into the meat of this. We've got 15 minutes or so, so I'd really like to get into walking through the template. So I think there'll be a real interest there. So if you could just roll on a couple of slides, Sean. Righty-ho. So I feel like we generally try and be humble, but I think we can confidently talk to what good looks like, given we've had the #1 CEO report template on Google in the world for a year or two now. So what you're seeing here, and we'll jump into the detail, this is all downloadable. You'll get the materials, as Sean has said, after this webinar. But if you go to the BoardPro blog and type in CEO report, you'll see our templates and be able to download both the blank template and the worked examples. So really what I'm going to do is just step you through. We'll just focus on page #1, and I'll just step you through the thirds of that, and we'll just talk to them. So do you want to go to the next slide, Sean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So actually, I think we've skipped one. Can you go back up one, Sean? I think your fingers just clicked one too many then. Oh, can you click through? If we got the top metrics, it might have disappeared. Keep going. Oh yes, we've managed to miss the metrics. Go back up too, and we'll just have to speak to it. If you can zoom in at all, I don't think you probably can, Sean. But you can see there if you look at the left hand, so page 1 of the CEO report, and again, refer to the template, download it. You can see there for this example, which I based on a technology business I was CEO of 15, 17 odd years ago, essentially divided up and said, look, 3 major areas of the business, sales and marketing, the middle was financial, and then there was operations. So really divided up, and then under each of those sort of had the key metrics for the month, which I was color coding, black or red as to whether they were on track or not. These days I use traffic light symbols next to some of them, but basically giving, as we were talking to earlier, the ability for, because I know some board members, things happen in their lives, they're literally reading the board report, the worst case in the taxi on the way to the board meeting. So I know it's horrific, Deborah, and you would tell them off, but it does happen. I've seen it. So I'm doing my best, given their scenario, to prepare well. And if nothing else, they can come in here and scan these metrics and get a decent overview of how the business is doing. And you had a good comment, I think, Chris, about serving audiences.
Look, I think so. I mean, this is, we've got a lot of CEOs on this call, and look, this is what good looks like, and we all know what bad looks like. And without mentioning names, I joined a board some years ago, which I'm no longer on, but I was kind of shocked when I received the CEO report, because within it was like like trying to walk through molasses, right? There was just so much information, and whilst they had some of the key metrics, I had to get into the detail of the narrative, which was pages, to sort of figure out what was happening. I think this is about respecting the audience, really. It's you've got busy directors, and again, you're in control. You want to get what you need out of the meeting. So the last thing you want is for people to be in any way confused or not clear about how things are going. This report allows you just to get the fundamentals, the metrics out of the way. And I love the fact that, key decisions, top of mind, you're going to go through those other aspects, but you're making it really clear to the audience where you want to spend the time. Now, directors will, if they see something they don't like, they'll ask questions without notice. But fundamentally, the CEO's driving it. It's a much better look for a CEO to have that level of organisation than to try and, too much detail. What are you trying to hide?
Very nice. Did you want to comment as well, Deborah?
It's an age-old strategy for CEOs to bury the board in paperwork if they're trying to hide something. 100 pages or more, sometimes more, is not okay. And if your board is not reading your paper, it's the chairman's job to sort that out. And if you're a director, and I know there are only a few on this call who doesn't read your papers, everyone at the table knows that you looked at them in the taxi. Trust me, we know. And I have had occasion to adjourn a board meeting to allow the board members to refresh their memories about what's in the papers.
Yeah, and it's a good question from Melanie. What do you do if you're to manage a board if they're asking for too much information? I mean, I think you can simply use appendices, reports and other things. I mean, typically you're going to have access to that and you can include those, but try and keep the essence of your report fundamentally, straightforward, simple, that's going to direct the conversation and not get bogged down in detail.
There's a couple of questions that have
Yeah,
come
a few
through.
questions. I was just going to bring those up, actually, if you don't mind, Brett.
Yeah. I'll leap in first, Sean. There was a couple there I'd seen about metrics for not-for-profits and where to get metrics from. So from my perspective, if you've been CEO for a while, you'll know what's top of mind for your board members, so you can build those in. But there's nothing, Deborah alluded to as well, there's often standard metrics for industry types, and then really just ask the board. For me, they're living metrics, and I swap them out from time to time as we go through stages of our business. So it's a great, topic of discussion with the board to decide what metrics to do, should be there. Anything you'd add, Deborah or Chris?
Yeah, I agree. And, there are questions around fundraising and partnership metrics that don't shift dramatically. A lot of your metrics are not going to shift dramatically in a month. The board needs to know that you're maintaining those relationships. Similarly, if you're in a corporate that's got enterprise customers, your number of customers isn't going to shift dramatically in a month. But it's about the engagement with those fundraising and partnerships. Donor numbers may not shift, but the number who donate every month might, for example.
Hey, Sean, I might suggest we move on. There's going to be more questions I think we can handle here, so we should grab them before the end, and we may do either a deep dive or post some answers. So I'll move on here to the middle part, and I'll call you in after this, Chris, because you were commenting to this effect before. So that next part of the CEO report, you can see there key decisions and discussions. So this is mirroring the agenda. I'm always cross-referencing between the two. So this is just repeating what I said earlier. I'm thinking about the outcomes I want as I write the board report, and I'm signaling to the board that I'm not merely writing my CEO report with no reference to what should be important to the organisation and them. So sometimes these are directly related to a decision paper. Sometimes there's just something I know we should go through in more depth, a key learning or something, so forth. And then top of mind is the opportunity, and you can see in the boilerplate text there, areas of focus or concern for the CEO. So whatever's waking me up at 3 a.m, I endeavour to put on there. There's a bit of bravery involved in that, and I think that's your segue, Chris.
Yeah, look, as you can see from this template, you're trying to simplify and be very concise about areas that you want to focus on. There's so many things you can discuss as a board meeting. I mean, one of the boards, again, I won't mention any names, but some time back, we were spending 6 hours in a board meeting because directors want to come in and discuss everything, right? And the reality is it's not an effective use of time, because 6 hours, you're starting to, lose the will to live, in some cases. So again, it's incumbent on the CEO and the chair to agree these things. I might see something here that's top of mind for the CEO that I think should be top of mind, and I can raise that, but at least you're getting a very clear signal from the CEO as to what's keeping them awake. You mentioned, we sort of skipped through it, but it was good to see in the survey that by and large, there's good trust between the CEO and board. And it's always challenging. I mean, I've been there before, when you're CEO and you either, there's some challenges or there's not a great team dynamic and you're not feeling the ability to be vulnerable. The most important thing about this is having a safe environment where the CEO can talk up and actually raise concerns, because you're a team, right? So the board's there to support the CEO. This is not a beat-up session. And for the CEO, it's not ass covering. This is about working together as a team. And so you've got to make sure you're in a position where you can surface things that are critical to the organisation you're serving. And that requires, trust to be present there. I mean, if you want to go and read a great book about, the dysfunctions of a team, Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, trust is number 1. And through trust, you're going to get great debate. You're not going to be avoiding conflict. Although all of those teams' dynamics play out so importantly when you're on a board, either as a director or CEO.
Righty-ho. Let's move on to the last. I know you need a few minutes at the end to close up, Sean, so we've got probably about 5 minutes. Let's move to the last one, and then we can do any questions. So the end of my 1-page CEO report, and I never allow myself ever to go over 1 page. as Chris was alluding to, it forces me into the discipline of only deciding the most important things for the organisation. So big wins and learnings, just great to be able to, have a bit of praise and feel good about, but also what are any key learnings? I think it's such a great way to maintain the discipline that all organisations must continue to learn or they'll ultimately die. And then finally, the CEO report, you can see, so little room left, in this case, literally 4 or 5 sentences. So I'm really thinking about, well, what's the key message I want to, send to the board? And I might bring you in there, Deborah.
Yeah, I think that summary of how things are going, how the CEO is feeling about things is the most important part, really, of what's happening. This is all about the board supporting management to grow the company generally, or to take the company to the future, as you said, or the organization. And that only works, the board is only useful if it adds value, and knowing where you're at as a CEO enables us as board members to add value. I will say on the 1-page thing, it doesn't mean you can get away with 8-point font. Remember, sadly, most of your board members are old people with limited eyesight.
The only thing I'd add there, I mean, we spend a lot of time on the metrics, there's a lot of objectivity and financials and things, and I think it's really good from time to time, well, when you're in a board meeting, to get a strong sense from the CEO about how they're feeling, both their sense of the business, the market, and how they're dealing with it personally. I go back years ago when I started at Xero, and I probably, being over the ditch, didn't get the opportunity too often to have those conversations. And I remember the first board meeting was like, how are you feeling about the market? Like, how do you feel we're going, over there? And it was a really good sense, because it opened up a conversation about, my observations. And, there's nothing better than being able to have that open dialogue, if there's problems or opportunities, and then what needs to happen next. It's just a great opportunity for CEOs to have that dialogue.
And I mean, a CEO role is the loneliest role there is in business, because you don't have a peer group in the organization. And so you need to rely on the board to be that support system.
We have a few minutes left, Brett. I think we should touch on a few of the questions that have just come through. You happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
From Richard Easton, in smaller organisations, the CEO report is often the only one for the board and business, and there isn't the scale or capacity to have sub-reports for fundraising, service delivery, finance. Have you any models that allow to blend both?
Oh, look, the only comment I would make is, we have approached 30-odd staff here. I still try and keep it simple and just allow my functional managers to write literally a section of the report, which I might coach and guide them. So we blend it all together. So I don't really have experience of putting up separate reports. Anything you guys would add to that?
No, anything that's material would be in the CEO report, in my view.
Yeah, and anything that's related to the business can be put in the appendices. That's fine to do that as well. The board paper should be comprehensive, and I don't mind if I get a long board paper, so long as my time's respected, whereby the critical things are actually presented in the CEO report, because there might be something that is presented, a strategy paper, or it could be even. I mean, I'll even, involved in tech companies, I like to see some of the detail. I'll go and read a pen test report, so penetration testing or security audit that's been done, because I have a duty of care. So if you feel that as a director, it should be in the board paper that at least you've presented that, and you can have a summary. So give me the summary, but if I want to go into the detail, you can include that in the appendices.
I've got to answer this question. This is hilarious. So in my worked example, I made up a name of a blend of a couple of people and mentioned a Simon Thompson who was underreporting at my technology business 10 years ago. And this Simon Thompson is on the call and I said, how did I end up getting mentioned as underperforming? We should have had a warning, Simon. You know, no
Not a
real
real
names
person.
used.
I'm not going near any names. No names.
Let's do Patsy's question. Is your one-pager a summary that you have more detailed report behind that one page? Yes, typically yes. You know,
Yeah.
for me, I typically have 5, 6, 7 pages. A lot of it graphs for financial. We'll have a separate financial pack. So typically a board pack.
We're sort of rushing through, but I'll pick up on a startup question about having too much operations. I don't mind that. If you're still finding product market fit, that may be appropriate. You know, it's a good question. It's about getting the balance right. You know, if you find the board's focusing on operational matters, it may be that they've got some concerns in terms of how the business is running. So that's something perhaps to look at. But yeah, look, I think getting the balance right is the key there.
The question about how long board meetings go for is really how long is a piece of string. Most of the medium to small organizations boards, I would imagine, should be getting through their work in 2 to 3 hours. What do you reckon, Brett?
Well, on a good day, we'll get through in 2 hours. On a bad day where there's a lot of contention or shareholder views, because we have shareholders around the table, we can spend 4 or 5 hours. But that's hard work. I agree with Chris.
I think one of the better practices I've seen is maybe, you know, if you're meeting every month as a board, each quarter maybe have a long form board meeting. So you do maybe, you know, 5 hours, like to really get into the nitty gritty. And then the others can be maybe 1.5 hours to just, you know, and you'll have a board pack to reflect that. You can still provide details. So, you know, I like the term take it as read, right? Because, you know, as directors, you have an obligation to read the board pack. But you don't necessarily need to spend 5 hours going through all the nitty gritty. So maybe 4 long form board meetings a year and the others short form.
And, you know, if there are key decisions, you would have paperwork to support those key decisions, obviously.
Yeah, totally. Good paperwork and frankly, good work by the CEO to get ahead of objections and deal with them before the meeting should minimise. The second half of Dale Tower's question, I only ever allow 15 minutes for Q&A on the CEO's report, which essentially signals it's taken as read. And I think a good board member should, if they want a longer discussion and it's not on the agenda, should signal that beforehand.
All right, so gentlemen, we have time. Let's wrap things up. Please feel free to reach out to Brett, Deborah and Chris just on their LinkedIn details here. I'm sure they would appreciate a connection from you. We also have some fabulous webinars coming up over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Some of them are listed here. The next one we have on the schedule is creating effective minutes for your board meeting. That's on May 5th. And then through from May until September, we have a range of really fantastic webinars which we're going to be releasing. So you can find out all about those on our webinar page, which is boardprohub.com/webinars. What you're seeing there are the current webinars over the next 4 to 5 weeks. And if you scroll down on that page, which I can't do at the moment, you'll see all of our past webinars, which include the video recordings, the white papers, the guides, checklists, and so on and so forth. So thanks again, everybody. I hope that we'll see you back for our other webinars in the series over the next 2 to 3 months. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you'll receive an email from us shortly after the session today where you'll get a copy of the CEO report template, a CEO report guide book, a copy of the recording, and then a copy of the slide deck from the presentation today. And as you leave the webinar today, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. You go into the draw to win a hamper worth over $400 from our friends at Taken Care Of. So thanks for your attendance today, everybody. Really appreciated. Thanks, Deborah, Chris, and Brett, for your time and knowledge. We will see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Great pleasure.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bye.